Hey everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Jake and today we are going to be looking at the subreddit r/maliciouscompliance. So sit back, relax and enjoy some satisfying stories. Catman Vs Karen, Awning of Justice. About 4 years ago, I decided to go small and got a 29-inch fifth wheel for my 3 cats and myself, and got lucky enough to find a spot in the park that was basically perfect for us. Pretty much anything I needed was in walking distance or a 5-minute drive, and my cats were allowed to run around on the provision that they had access to an outdoor litter box that I would maintain in my space, and they didn't cause any problems with noise, fighting with other cats, etc. The rent was reasonable and fixed for 2 years with all utilities included except electric, so honestly I was thrilled. About a year and a half went by and all seemed well, until one evening I returned from work to find a note taped to my door. I unfolded it to find that a complaint had been made against my cats to park management, and I needed to come into the office and have a talk about some things. This was my first note from management in my time there, and my only real interaction with them had been the occasional wave as I passed by the office or the monthly rent payment ritual. It was already 6:45, so I decided to wait until the next morning. In the interest of avoiding further complaints, I brought my boys inside for the night and settled into bed around 11 PM. I awoke around 8:15 AM to someone pounding on my door. It actually loosened the hinge pin on my interior door handle, and I opened it to meet Karen. I say this because not only did she truly embody the very essence of Karenhood, it was also her name. Me, bleary and barely awake. "Can I help you?" Karen, on what I can only presume is her 5th bottle of cold brewed coffee. "Hi OP, I'm Karen, the new park manager, and we need to have a talk about your cats, mkay?" Yes, she literally said mkay, like a lot. "Yes, I saw your note and I was planning to come by when I got up." "Well, the office has been open since 7 AM, so I just thought you were avoiding me." "Well, I typically work nights, so I'm not usually up at 7 AM. "Oh, so you're the roll out of bed around noon type then?" This sounded incredibly condescending, whether it was meant to or not. Usually closer to 10 AM, but I'm awake now. Let me throw on some people clothes and I'll be right over, mkay?" Karen nodded awkwardly, probably realizing for the first time how ridiculous she sounded, and went back to the office. Now, I am not a morning person, as due to some medical issues that I won't go into here, I have a bit of a pill ritual that requires food and lots of water, or I spend the day in bed or the restroom. Figuring this wouldn't take too long, I popped in a coffee pod while I got dressed and fed the boys, then strolled to the office with a cup in hand, but no food, water or pills in my system as of yet. I was about to start thinking you'd gone back to sleep. It had been 15 minutes maximum since you had left, 20 since you'd awakened me. Sorry, I had to feed my cats and wake up a wee bit. I gesture with my mug. Now, what can I do for you? I worked in bars for almost 2 decades, so I'm putting on my diplomatic conflict resolution hat to start with. Well, your cats are the issue that we're here to discuss. We've had some complaints that they've been harassing some of the other guests' smaller animals, and people have said they've seen animals pooping underneath your trailer, which is a violation of the space rental agreement. Wow, I'm sorry to hear that they're attacking other animals. I didn't think they were aggressive like that. As for the poop though, I have an addendum to my rental agreement that allows me to have an outdoor litter box. I can show it to you if you'd like. No, I know about your agreement. She air quotes unnecessarily. But that's up in about 6 months, so I think it's time we renegotiate the terms. So basically, we're talking about changes that need to be made by the time this lease is up, and you're being a champ and giving me a 6 months heads up? Cool. This is not what she was trying to do, but again, diplomacy. Yes, that's the gist of it. 15 minutes and several mks later, I walked out of the office with a horrible stomachache and a few pieces of important information. Number 1, an outdoor litter box would be permitted as long as it was enclosed and not under my trailer. Number 2, permanent or freestanding enclosures are not allowed. This was meant to apply to sheds and the like, but Karen decided to use this to make my outdoor cat box an impossibility. Number 3, my cats would be permitted outside, as long as they were in an enclosed area and or on a leash. And number 4, pet fences over 3 feet high were not permitted, and must be removed when not in use. My newfound knowledge in writing, I set out to find a solution to the problem, but I kept running into one thing or another that would break the rules. So after about a week of frustration, I decided to ask for a copy of my upcoming lease renewal, as I like to adhere to the letter of the law. Karen gleefully printed it up and signed it in front of me, as apparently she'd already drafted it and was expecting to deliver it to me well before the end of my current lease. I didn't even look at it until I got back to my place, but then, cue malicious compliance. The new lease said essentially what I thought it would. Basically, that if I could find a way to adhere to all these rules simultaneously, there wouldn't be a problem, but the tiniest infraction would result in a park fine. I began looking at the technical definitions of the word used in the lease, and finally discovered something that worked in my favor. Freestanding, not supported by another structure. This was it, my ace in the hole. I now had an idea. I was still making payments on the trailer, and one of the stipulations of the finance agreement was that I maintained full coverage insurance on it until it was paid off. That meant that I could potentially report any damage to any part of the trailer, inside and out, to my insurance company, and they would cover it. My door awning, a standard 16x8 vinyl awning, was about 20 years old, and badly in need of replacement. So I called around and found a place that does awning repair and installation, as well as solarium design. I met with a consultant, Mick, on Friday afternoon and told him exactly what I needed and why. He smirked and asked for my insurance information. Then he would call me the following Monday. Monday rolls around and my boys have been inside all weekend, so we're all going a bit crazy being cooped up together for so long at a time, and I was awake at 9 AM when the phone rang. I ran to it gleefully, expecting to find Mick on the other end of the line, but instead I found a representative from my insurance company, who was calling to inform me that my repairs have been covered and my deductible was something like $430. Not ideal, but given the scope of what was about to happen, I didn't mind too much. I went to the office and told Karen's husband that I was having my awning repaired and was just waiting for an installer to call me. Fast forward 10 days. Karen and Dave, Karen's husband, went out of town for the weekend. So while they were gone, Mick and his crew spent 9 hours over 2 days putting up an absolutely gorgeous screened outdoor dining enclosure with a snap-on canvas outer shell, and the whole thing was supported by the awning bracket and cleverly designed series of poles that made absolutely certain that there was no way it could be interpreted as freestanding or permanent. And since it was definitely not a fence, and completely enclosed my outdoor litter box, I had complied with the letter of the law. Now, I prefer to err on the side of caution, so I also implemented a contingency plan. I have a particularly crafty friend who enjoys a challenge, and was very much in the spirit of what I was trying to do. So he helped me build a 10x7 interior wooden enclosure that used the poles for the side screen wall of the awning extension as its primary support, so again, not freestanding. We also isolated a path between the RV door and the enclosure door, as well as blocking off the undercarriage to help corral the cats. Sunday evening, Karen comes home to find this classy Brobdingnagian fumigation tent attached to my RV, and as expected, throws a fit. She comes stomping over but can't find the door flap. It wasn't marked. If I wanted her to know, or if she'd bothered to ask, I probably would have told her, but she didn't give me the chance. So she walks back to her car, drives over, and starts honking her horn until I come out. Mind you, I'm sitting about 15 feet from her inside the enclosure, calmly smoking a cigarette and petting one of my cats. I let the honking go on for about 30 seconds. As predicted, she started screaming at me about how this clearly was a violation of the lease, but I spent the next 15 minutes showing her exactly how it was not in any way, and since the lease made no distinction as to what I could do, but focused rather on what I could not do, size restrictions, etc., there was no language indicating that I had done anything wrong. Karen then tried to claim that the lease agreement was 6 months out and could still be changed, at which point I pulled out the signed copy she gave me and showed her that I had signed and dated it the day she gave it to me. She then tried to argue that I had forged her signature and created the document myself. I then informed her that I had sent a copy of the document to my insurance company a few weeks prior, and we were both in the office, under the surveillance cameras when she printed, signed, and handed it to me. They still have one of those old 4-panel black and white surveillance systems, and the monitor is on the counter in the office, right underneath the camera covering the entire office. I can't remember what happened next exactly, but I do know that Karen tried to remove the non-load bearing screen wall that isolated the door pathway and ended up getting stuck in the screen, breaking the frame, falling over, and threatening me with a lawsuit. At which point my neighbor came over and stated loudly through the enclosure that it wasn't soundproof and he'd heard everything that happened. Bob, I could kiss you if you weren't so weird and gross. In the end, I got to keep my enclosure, and several other people in the park noticed my solution and did the same as quickly as possible. Within the next few months, I became something of a hero to some of the longtime residents of the park, because apparently I wasn't the only one being harassed. I was just the first one to find a solution. Oh, and it turns out the complaint was made by Karen to herself, because she wanted to let her small dog run around but couldn't stop him from chasing cats. That was 2.5 years ago, and I'm still in the same spot. Karen and her husband, on the other hand, were found to be too volatile to manage the park and were relocated, by the same owner, to a 24-hour storage warehouse outside of town where they provide on-site security. I still see them every so often when they come to get propane because it's cheaper here, even though they don't get the park resident discount anymore. I have a bit of a wood shop set up in my new space outside, and now I have 6 cats, a wife, and a stepdaughter who all love their indoor/outdoor porch. I really want to see a picture of this because it's quite hard to picture what exactly it'll look like. I can kind of get a feel for it, but I really want to see a picture. If you want all responsibility, I'll gladly comply. Some 5 years ago, I lived together with a couple. The guy, a friend of mine, had been living there for several years, while I only moved in 2 years ago, and his girlfriend moved in a year ago. Both his girlfriend and I paid rent to him, and he forwarded to the landlord. Due to some heavy storms, part of the building had suffered damages, mainly my room and the kitchen. While the kitchen was being renovated, the landlord cut our rent, as it was unusable for almost 2 months. Obviously, we all shared in these deductions. After the kitchen was refurnished, they started working in my bedroom and I had to sleep on the couch, and my housemate said he thought it was only proper that all of us would pay less. I didn't agree, as they didn't experience any inconvenience, but didn't argue too much, and eventually shared half of my cut. I was annoyed but didn't protest. Not much later, I asked for the electricity and water bills, as we wanted to see if we could change providers to save some money. But every time, he said he would send it in a few days or next week, cause he didn't have access to them at the moment, which is BS. Everything is sent by mail plus saved in your online account. After a while, I got suspicious and became more insistent, even refusing to pay another bill until I saw it, which is within my legal rights where I live. Until, after about 6 months, he sent me a Word document with the amounts, typed by himself, saying this was what I had asked for. I specifically asked for all bills from the past year. Now I was angry. At the same time, he and his girlfriend broke up, and while we were looking for a new roommate, we shared the added expenses of increased rent. But when we found a new housemate, I found out that this landlord had pardoned the girlfriend's share, and he let me pay extra while he had no increase in rent whatsoever. I was so sick and tired of it that I wanted to sit down and confront him about everything, but then came the clincher. While we were looking for a housemate, he was annoyed with having to rewrite the contract every time, and I advised him that he could take up to 2/3 of the contract and sublet a room with permission from the landlord. We discussed it at length and eventually went to the bank to absolve the contract, after which I found out the new contract didn't include me at all. He was now the sole tenant and I was his subtenant. At this point, I was already ticked, and when we finally had agreed to sit down and talk, he stood me up, twice, without letting me know. I was furious. So I thought, hey, you want to be the sole tenant with all the responsibilities? Have at it. I started looking for a new apartment, found it within a week and moved out without him knowing. One day later, we finally sat down at the 3rd try and I explained all my grievances for which he couldn't find an excuse. He said we should put it all behind us and move on with a clean slate. So I looked at him and said, oh no, we're not moving on. I moved out. I'm just here to pick up one more box. I'm done. And I walked out, leaving him behind without a tenant, 3 months of unpaid bills he didn't bother to send me, and a half-painted room filled with all the garbage I was gonna throw out and holes from where the shelves hung. It might make me look like a vindictive douche, but I did give him fair warning for several months, and tried to play fair despite his ill-intentioned acts. But I enjoyed it so much, especially because everything I did was within the legal bounds he chose. He blocked me on Facebook later. That is someone you do not want to live with. If they don't show you the bills, then they are just messing you over in some way or another. I would be straight out of there. That malicious compliance was really good. Hey everyone, I hope you all had a really good day and that you enjoyed that video. If you want to check out some other videos, then click on screen right now or check out the playlist down below. If you enjoyed that video, then please do leave a like. And if you want to submit your own stories, then you can do so by joining the Discord in the top link in the description. But thank you so much for watching and I will see you very soon.